Hello and welcome to Fight Club. Well, not really, but as you can see, sartorially we're in that ballpark. This is Stephen E. Andrews, outlaw bookseller, author of 100 must-read science fiction novels. And today I wanted to talk to you about my current favourite SF novels set on the planet Mars. I say current because it will change from day to day as there are so many set on Mars. But this is where I'm feeling at the moment, and of course I've got all the red drag on because Mars, of course, is the red planet, as we know. So I thought sartorially I should step up and go from that angle, and it's good fun. And but I'm going to get this jacket off because it's just so hot in this room. It's late September and it's boiling. You know what it is. It's global warming. We'll end up like Mars before we know it. If you want, I'm going to pop this off. If you want to listen to a great rock and roll track about Mars, no, I'm not going to say David Bowie. I'm going to suggest you listen to Uncle Sam's on Mars by Hawkwind from PXR5, which is a great song about environmental collapse. So, and recorded way back in the late 70s. I think it was 76, 77. So there you go. Anyway, without further ado, let's talk about Mars. Well, I'm going to try and go chronologically because I wanted to make this about a couple of classic things which you can never say too much about because they're so great, and then some more unusual things. And a few years ago, a friend of mine, whose book I'm going to cover today, wrote a SF novel set on Mars which had quite a lot of acclaim. I was very pleased for him because he's a great guy. I'll come to that later on. But when I first gave him feedback on the book, I said to him, I really enjoyed it, but you've got to be aware that at the moment I'm suffering from Aries syndrome, which is fatigue with books set on Mars. Because when I read my friend's book, and I will mention it now because I'll talk about it later on, this is The Song My Enemies Sing by James Wright. James and I worked together for a few years. I'll tell you more about him later on. I thought about other books set on Mars I'd read, and I thought of 25 without even writing any down, just counting in my head and without looking through my book collection. So obviously it's a classic venue for SF because naturally it would be our closest planetary neighbour and all that and what have you, and we've seen all the marvellous photographs that we've acquired over the years with space missions and what have you. So let's talk about books. For me, there are books set on Mars before this one, but this has to be the motherlode. Edgar Rice Burroughs' Princess of Mars, which is the first of his many Mars novels, and this is a wonderful lurid Del Rey edition, which I've had for quite a long time. I think you could probably still get this. And some people say this is fantasy. I would call it planetary romance. It has sword and sorcery elements. The beauty of early planetary romance is that, if you don't know what planetary romance is, it's sort of, basically, you could say it's sword and sorcery stories set on other planets. They tend to be from the pulp era. This came out in 1912, and there are several sort of antecedents to this, things like Lee Brackett's work, The Sea Kings of Mars, which is marvellous. Some of C.L. Moore's Northwest Smith stories, which you can buy now in Northwest of Earth, published in Galax Masterworks. I've got a lot to say about C.L. Moore. I'm going to talk about her again and again, as you'll see. And this is absolutely marvellous, about a Civil War officer who is mysteriously transported to Mars, where he fights all sorts of alien creatures and falls in love with the gorgeous Martian princess Deathores. And there's been a film version or two which are best avoided, and this is absolutely glorious. It's wonderful. It's the sort of book you're best to read when you're about 12, and I can't say enough good about it. It is one of the motherlodes. Edgar Rice Burroughs, of course, is probably the most important writer in the history of pulp fiction. You could say that about Robert E. Howard, you could say that about H.P. Lovecraft, you could say it about C.L. Moore, actually. But Burroughs is before that, and he marks the beginning, to me, of a new tradition where he draws on literature and really turns it into solid, definitive pulp. And it's just great stuff. Around about the same time, he wrote the first Tarzan novel, The Noble Man, The Noble Savage, and also the first of the Caspar Caprona series, The Land That Time Forgot. And these are all things that I absolutely loved and read when I was a kid, and they still have a raw energy and colour to them which can't be beaten. So if you've never read this, you really must. It's great fun. The sequels were a bit too much for me. I like a little bit of pulp. I don't like to go too far, so that's a real essential one to read. Recently, I acquired this really nice Library of America edition. As you can see that I have it bagging some things, and sometimes another reflection just comes across. So I'll just tilt that a bit there. Absolutely lovely. And this has just gone out of print, and I think this has got a introduction by Huno Diaz, which is funny. You know, I prefer an introduction by Philip Jose Farmer. Sadly, he's dead, but Diaz, you know, even though he's a controversial figure apparently these days, he sort of, you know, was a literary figure who has championed SF. So, you know, thanks for that, Huno. You know, it's good to see somebody's in our corner. So, Princess of Mars, you can't go wrong, 1912. I'm going to move forward quite a bit then, because obviously there were lots of Mars books in the early days of the SF magazines from 1926 onwards, Stanley G. Weinbaum, that sort of thing, to, you know, probably another really obvious one, and that's Ray Bradbury's The Silver Locusts, aka Martian Chronicles. And Martian Chronicles is a fix-up. It's a collection of short stories put together into a novel, different characters, and, you know, it's lyrical, toothsome, beautiful, pastoral, and in some parts really, really scary as well. Bradbury's ability as a horror writer really comes through in this classic collection of SF stories. And it's not very scientific, but that's not the point. It's the poetry of Mars that appeals to us. The idea of canals, the idea of maybe a lost race living there, vanished civilizations, all the stuff that almost certainly didn't happen. But we know we're in love with that. And there's a little epigraph on the page that says, "It is good to renew one's wonder," said the philosopher. "Space travel has again made children of us all." And, you know, that's very, very much Bradbury's thing. And, you know, even though later on Bradbury didn't move forward, he stuck to that style. And I think by the late 80s, I was kind of tired of it, but I read all his work, you know, up until then, and a few beyond then, and absolutely lovely. And until you've read, you know, some of the stories in this, you know, which are, you know, magnificent. There Will Come Soft Rains, wow, Million Year Picnic towards the end. Just great, great stuff, and some really scary moments as well. Particularly the one where the astronauts come across a small town, just like a town they came from in America, and they think their parents are there. Spooky. Recently I acquired this Granada hardcover with the same jacket design, and I wanted one of these for years. My friend Phil back in Wales used to have one, and it's got a bit of a leaning spine, sadly. I know it's bagged again, you probably can't see it that clearly, but I put it in a bag and tightened it to try and get some of the lean out of it. And this is an 80s, late 70s, early 80s reissue. I think there was a 70s reissue with the same jacket with the silver locusts on the cover. I'm sure that's what my friend Phil had, but I can't confirm that. It could be false memory syndrome, could be Aries syndrome. And there was one of these on sale on ABE, which is about 70 quid. It's probably still there from somebody in the UK. And I came across this in a small second-hand bookshop just a couple of miles from where I live. And I just nipped in there in the off chance because I just had a feeling. And this was there, and I haggled with the chappie in the counter. It was very nice. And he wanted 35, and I knocked him down to 25. It did have a bit of a tear somewhere in the jacket, which I prepared. So I was really, really pleased with that. That's one of my best scores recently, because I didn't want to pay 70 quid, but I really wanted this really badly. Because I do love Granada and Grafton hardcovers in demi format and this livery. My favourite livery in sort of SF packaging, really. So those are two classic ones to begin with. I'm then going to move on to a book which I feel should be much better known. It's by a famous author. It's not a book which is talked about as much as it should be. It is by the critics, but it's not always often by the fan base. And this was the second book I read by Philip K. Dick, and this is Martian Timeslip in the SF Master Series from New English Library, NEL. And this is a UK first edition. These are very uncommon. I read this from our school library. We had a great English teacher who used to buy SF in for those of us who were interested, and she got some good stuff. And you probably know the A format from this cover, which is a Bruce Pennington, I think. I do like Bruce's work, it's fantastic. There's some covers for Chris Priest as well. And Martian Timeslip is about plumbing unions on Mars. It's about autism. I think this is one of the first treatments of autism, and it being called autism in fiction. I don't know if I'm using the correct terminology these days. Maybe I should Asperger's. There's a young boy in this who's autistic. Wonderful cast of characters. Philip K. Dick, like Charles Dickens, has that facility to cast, you know, a dozen characters in front of you, deft strokes, and when he does it well, he didn't always do it well because he wrote very quickly, but when he does it well, he does in this one, you know, the distinct characters and this corruption, supply of water, how dreadful it is to live on Mars. And it has a sort of Australian feel because there are Martian natives called the Bleak Men, who are depicted rather like Aboriginals are depicted up to a certain date in Australian fiction and film. And it's a wonderful, wonderful book. And you know, it's the thing that blew me away about this. You know, I'd read people like Herbert and Heinlein and what have you, and before them I'd read classic writers like Wyndham, Wells, Poe, Edgar Rice Burroughs, and Dick just seemed like an adult, where Heinlein and Herbert just, you know, didn't have the same sort of feel. Obviously this is later on, this is 1960s. There's a great essay in this edition called Dick's Maledictory Web. It's not called that in this edition, it is called that in a book of criticism of Dick's work I've got somewhere, which I'll show you one day. And you know, this absolutely wonderful novel remains in my top 5 PKD books, and you really should read it because it's fantastic. Hopefully someday somebody will make a film of it. If they made a film of it set in Australia, that would be perfect. Brilliant, brilliant novel. I can't say enough good about it. And there's this amazing sequence in there that does cognitive dissonance, and really, really well, because you want a bit of cognitive dissonance in your SF. You want something to shake you up and to make you go, whoa, what's going on? When I first read the sequence, I'm not going to tell you about it, I thought it was a misprint or a misbind where a section was bound in twice, but it really gets you looking closely at the text, and it really makes you think, because it is a Martian time slip, and that's the key to that. So an amazing sequence, one of the finest sequences experimentally I feel in Dick's work altogether. So Martian time slip, fantastic stuff. And I'm going to jump forward a bit then to a couple of later books from the 70s. This is Farewell Earth's Bliss by D.G. Compton, a great English literary SF writer who was active 60s to late 80s, and he's still alive now. He must be about 90. He's ancient, hasn't written anything for a long time, and he is just a wonderful novelist. I mean, this guy has written Gothic romances under other names. He could have had a career as a mainstream novelist. He's very, very fine English literary SF writer. And this is about a penal colony on Mars in the future, rather like the whole Australia thing, Botany Bay. So you see the Australian thing coming up a lot. It's really interesting. And you see that in a lot of Mars novels because you think of the huge spaces in the outback in Australia where nobody can live. You know, most people in Australia live near sources of water. They live by the sea, and there are very few running rivers in Australia, of course. So Farewell Earth's Bliss, it's a very gloomy book, very dark. Compton was like that. It's very English. I mean, absolutely brilliant. You know, this gets across the grittiness and the horror of being sent to a penal colony on another world, and reminiscent in some ways of Hawksbill Station by Robert Silverberg, but a lot grittier. And you know, as much as I love Silverberg and Hawksbill, this is probably a better book. Slightly different concept, because that's about time banishment rather than space banishment. But this is fantastic. It's long out of print, of course. There may be a Kindle edition or something. You'll probably pick it up secondhand without too much difficulty. Compton is really something you should read if you like English literary SF and you haven't read it. Okay, then we're going to move forward now into the 80s and into the real sort of modern and postmodern stuff. And the next book is a book which I ignored for quite some time. I say ignored, I just didn't get round to it. And the 80s was a great time for American SF. But I didn't read this until about 20 years ago, and I'm ashamed because this is fantastic. One of the best SF novels of the 80s. For me, this is up there with New Romancer, Dr. Ada by K.W. Jeter, which was written in the 70s, not published in the 80s. Blood Music by Greg Bear. This is one of the great genre SF novels of the 80s and still really vital now. And it's been reissued by Head of Zeus a couple of years ago. Nobody seems to stock it, but it's fantastic. This is Frontera by Lewis Shiner. And I don't know why I didn't pick it up at the time. I was drawn to it because Frontera is also the title of a song by Phil Manzanera from Roxy Music, from his debut solo album, and it's sung by Robert Wyatt, and a great song. And so I don't know why I didn't go around to it, but I bought this about 20 years ago, and quite frankly, it took my head off. This is a book which will, you know, in all its toothsome genius, it's abrasive, it's hard. It's like coming off a skateboard and, you know, without any sort of pads on and grazing your knuckles and your shins. It's like doing a slam. Funnily enough, Lewis Shiner wrote a book called Slam, which was about skateboarding, which is fantastic. His work's all back in print in the UK now, mostly, and as I say, Head of Zeus do it. But as I say, nobody seems to stock it. So do try and pick his work up, because he's fantastic. He never repeats himself. There's different things all the time, which is career suicide for a commercial novelist. But he's also a very fine literary writer as well. And this involves a plot on Mars, a ramshackle spaceship that's sort of bolted together, falling apart, characters under duress, and there's a cadre of mutant children on the planet with psionic powers. And it's a bit like if, for example, Total Recall had been any good, but more sort of like Scanners meets Ubik on Mars, and it'll just tear your face off. I love it. It's so hard and abrasive, and you can see it, you know, it's ultra vivid picturing of the Martian landscape and the characters, and it really has no mercy, this book, and I absolutely love it. So get out there and buy it, because it's fantastic. Raw punk energy from beginning to end. Frontera by Lewis Shiner, and a very underrated writer. I really like his stuff. Get out there and buy it. So this was like a Damascus, road to Damascus conversion for me. I felt my knees blinded by the psionic light of what happens in this book. So it really, really will strip your skin off. So tough stuff. It's great. But of course, it's as much about attitude as it is about actual violence that tells. When I talk like this, I'm usually talking about attitude. Anybody can write about violence, but to put something special behind it, so that you feel the mental agony, not just the physical, and the existential angst, that's the mark of good writing, I feel, really. I do like writing that confronts these things, and you know, anybody can depict blood and gore and bone and what have you, but it's more important to get to the skull beneath the skin in metaphoric terms, and Shiner does this really well. Before I move on to my last selection, I realised that I missed out a Ray Bradbury. Just so you can see, this is the 40th anniversary edition of the Martian Chronicles. Very beautiful there. There we go. That's a nice one. And published by Doubleday. So that would have been published around about 1990. Really, really nice. I'm going to pop these Martian shades off, because the light is sort of fading a bit behind me, which is good news. So finally, I want to talk about the song "My Enemies Sing" by James Reich, my friend. You know, you could say this is nepotism. I don't really care, because you know, he's a contemporary writer, and we should be looking at somebody contemporary. And we do often see the same old thing about Mars. This definitely isn't the same old thing. I think there are precedents in some ways. They're not essentially precedents that James would have been aware of, but I know he's a huge fan of Martian Chronicles. We used to have a little band together, and we did a song called Martian Chronicles, which James wrote. It's a great song. And I just played a few synths over it and stuff. And this is fantastic. Great title, and it's got a quotation on the front by Barry N. Malzberg, which is absolutely astonishing. This is James's fourth novel, I think. 1, 2, 3, fourth novel, or fifth. Fifth novel, of course. And Barry is somebody, a great writer, somebody I'm really, really passionate about and have been for many years. And when James and I worked together, I put him on to Barry, because I think Barry Malzberg's hugely neglected these days. He called a splash at the time because he won the John W. Campbell Memorial Award. And I either loaned or gave James, I can't remember which of the two, a copy of Guernica Night, which is one of my favourite Malzberg novels, which is about a luxurious future in which a youth cult is so bored because they can instantaneously matter transport anywhere in the world. It's all luxury, that they form like suicide cults. They call it the final trip. And I'm going to talk about this in Malzberg's work another time. So quite a dangerous book, very Goethe. But Malzberg is very sort of beetle-browed and detailed, and he's always chronicling inner mental states, usually first-person narratives, lots of joyless, grim sex, lots of angst, obsessed with the Kennedy assassination. Absolutely marvellous stuff. You know, it's not going to sort of please you if you're down, but if you've got like a good depressing work, you can't go wrong with Barry. So James wrote the introduction to a reissue of Beyond Apollo, Malzberg's most famous novel, a few years ago, published by a small press in the States. And Barry's very moved by that, and I've never really contacted him. I would love to. So Barry, if you're out there, please get in touch. And James also had a claim in this from Michael Moorcock, and you know, I mean, this is good stuff. I mean, both of them are writers who, sadly, the publishing has really let them down for years. For Malzberg since the beginning of the 80s, and in my view, for Moorcock, the publishing has been really, really bad since about, the mid-90s. And, when they were with more solid publishers, when there's a definite strategy going on there, it was more working for both of them. But I'm going to cover Moorcock extensively at one point as well, because he's somebody I absolutely love. But anyway, back to James. So I'm just going to read you a blurb from the back. Set against a haunting Martian landscape, the song my enemy sing is a surreal, disquieting science fiction vision of murder, revolution, manipulation and mystery. Ray Spector's search for meaning leads him to a teenage Black Panther named Eli Jones, the missionary Philippe Olmos, sometimes television star Richard Parrish, and Ingrid Auer, who dreams of becoming a terrorist. Under the shimmering grid drawn by the swarm satellites encircling the planet, with fading memories of an apocalyptic California, the Australian outback, there you go, and jungles in Mexico, their obsessions form strange patterns of dangerous relationships and alliances across time and species. Yeah, this is really good. I mean, to me, this is very much in the tradition of, say, James knows Martian Chronicles. He's very well read in SF, and it's just really intense. There's some great lyrical, gritty writing, wonderful use of language, lots of hallucinatory imagery, and just before I read this, I read a book by Lavi Tidhar called Martian Sands, which is kind of a riff on Martian Timeslip by Philip K. Dick. And Lavi Tidhar, he's a good writer, he's an Israeli SF writer, but I do get irritated with his seeming inability to do anything other than do postmodern riffs on other SF writers' work. I mean, he did a book called Black God's Kiss, which is a C.L. Moore title, and there's references in another one of his books to C.L. Moore's Shamblo, and it's okay. I mean, we like a little bit of that, but postmodernism is actually getting quite old now. The 80s was the time when, late 80s was the time when it flourished. But James really adds something different, and he takes all these influences, but he's got his own voice. He's got his own things to say, his own obsessions, and there's so much in this book. I can only say, you should just pick up and read it. It's not an easy read, I will say that. It's very literary. James writes in a mode which is more American than British, I feel, but he is British and he does have a great literary sensibility. And this is published by anti-oedipuspress.com. You can get it online. He's very involved with small press work, and he's also a co-contributor occasionally alongside me to Deep Ends, the Ballard anthology. So maybe a bit of a nepotistic one, but honestly it is really good. So if you pick these up and you work your way through them, you see a kind of clear lineage emerging there, from this sense of wonder in Burroughs to the lyricism of Bradbury to the English grit of D.G. Compton, and then we start to get the things which really pull it out. These are merciless books, and we need literature without mercy, without pity. We need things which are confrontational. I mean, so much genre SF is about wish fulfillment and fantasy. SF isn't about that. SF isn't about escaping from reality. It's about escaping into reality via metaphor to make it more interesting. We could all read social novels about, families with problems and relationships and what have you. And, the problem with that is they resemble our own lives, that's mimesis, what have you, but it doesn't have the entertainment value. So you want to take your pleasure seriously and be entertained, at the same time be confronted. And this is something that James does fantastically well. So I do get that. So today it will change. The Aries syndrome will return, and I'll probably come up with something different. I'll probably do another Mars one soon. A good shout out to Scott, one of my recent subscribers, who asked us some PKD. There we go. So there's Martian Timeslip for you. I will do some more PKD if you tell me exactly what you want, Scott, because I've got lots and lots of things. I'm going to be covering more anyway. So that's my favourite Martian books today. And remember, swarms of dead fish float on the lake, but Uncle Sam's on Mars. So this is Outlaw Bookseller, signing out for now.